Cassidy Monroe was the legacy expert, the backbone of her tech company, but her CEO, Darren Cole, arrogantly fired her, thinking he could replace expertise with ego. Within just 9 minutes, automated systems malfunctioned, client transactions failed, and $55,000 vanished. Cassidy watched quietly, sipping coffee, as her departure triggered chaos. Employees scrambled, clients panicked, and the board noticed the errors, all evidence of her indispensability. This Reddit-style story shows that patience, preparation, and real skill always outmatch arrogance. Cassidy's subtle, brilliant revenge proves that true expertise can't be erased, and sometimes, letting karma do the work is the most satisfying way to win. I still remember the exact moment when I, Cassidy Monroe, realized just how foolish my former boss, Darren Cole, had been the second he decided to fire me, the so-called legacy expert in our tech company, thinking that removing me from the team would somehow accelerate his own rise or make him look smarter to the board, and honestly, I almost laughed out loud in the office as he smugly handed me the termination letter, completely oblivious that within mere minutes, his arrogance would cost him an enormous sum of money, $55,000, lost in just 9 minutes because he had underestimated me, my understanding of the system, and the real consequences of meddling with operations I had spent over a decade perfecting, the algorithms, the server architectures, the automated monitoring tools, the integrations with client systems, every little tweak I had painstakingly created to keep the company efficient, reliable, and profitable, all of which Darren had ignorantly assumed could be replaced by a shiny new hire or a couple of junior programmers, and as I packed up my desk, taking care to collect the few personal items I had scattered over the years, I quietly smiled because I knew exactly what was about to happen, and I even left him a tiny hint, a subtle note in the code comments, a clever little instruction, knowing that his lack of experience in the field would prevent him from seeing it until it was too late, and as he strutted back to his office with the look of a man who thinks he's outsmarted everyone, I leaned back in my chair for one last time, sipping my coffee, appreciating the irony of the situation, because I had been the backbone of the operations, the person who maintained the legacy systems, guided the clients, ensured uptime, and trained every junior employee who had ever worked on my projects, and he just thought he could erase me with a signature, a few words, and some misplaced confidence, and as the countdown began, I knew that the first orders being processed without my careful oversight would trigger cascading errors, automated alerts, and failed transactions, all of which I had anticipated, all of which were entirely predictable to someone with a shred of experience. And Darren's smug grin began to falter almost immediately when the system he thought he controlled started throwing errors, clients called asking about misrouted data, and internal communications lit up with confusion, and he had no clue how to respond, because the tools and processes I had built weren't just lines of code, they were a living, breathing network of operational safeguards, and he had just taken the main architect out of the equation, and the financial impact was instantaneous, because the automated trades, client account transactions, and billing cycles I had meticulously calibrated started misfiring, miscalculating, and duplicating entries, all while Darren frantically tried to correct things, punching keys, calling IT, demanding answers, waving his arms like a man drowning in chaos he couldn't comprehend, and within 9 minutes, the company had lost $55,000, all traceable to his impulsive, short-sighted decision to fire the very person who had kept the company profitable and stable for years, and I had the satisfaction of watching it unfold from a safe distance, knowing that the employees who had remained loyal quietly thanked me under their breaths, grateful for my careful design, and the vendors and clients, too, were now in minor panic, but they still trusted the systems I had built, systems that, for 9 glorious minutes, highlighted Darren's incompetence in the most expensive way possible, and it was pure, delicious justice, because in America, where titles often overshadow knowledge, he had just learned the hard truth: you cannot replace expertise with ego, you cannot shortcut experience with ambition, and you cannot dismantle a legacy without suffering the consequences. And as the alarms stopped, and the error reports rolled in, I quietly walked out of the building, laptop in hand, knowing that my departure had triggered a perfect domino effect, a living lesson in hubris, and I didn't even have to raise my voice, didn't have to confront him, because the chaos itself was my message. Every misfired transaction, every confused employee, every panicked client call was a monument to my unseen, unacknowledged, and now deeply missed expertise, and I could almost hear his blood pressure rising through the phones, the email notifications, the messages from clients and the board, all asking questions he had no way to answer, because he didn't know what he had just undone, and I had, of course, saved a backup of the master logs, the one thing he had no access to, ensuring that when the board eventually demanded answers, they would see the pattern, see the errors, and understand that firing Cassidy Monroe, the legacy expert, was the single worst decision he could have made. And I walked out into the sunlight, the city bustling around me, feeling lighter than I had in years, because I knew that my revenge wasn't messy, it wasn't angry, it wasn't about confrontation, it was about letting competence, patience, and preparation speak louder than impulsive arrogance. And as I hailed a cab, I thought about how I would frame this story someday, Reddit style, a cautionary tale of ego versus expertise, showing that the person who actually knows the system, the architecture, and the consequences always holds the power. And Darren would think he could recover, but he couldn't, not really, because the confidence he had shattered with a single signature was not so easily rebuilt, and the financial loss, the embarrassment, and the realization that the so-called legacy expert had just walked out the door with a smile would linger, a permanent mark of his folly. And as the cab drove me away from the office, I allowed myself a quiet, victorious laugh. Because in those 9 minutes, every automated error, every misrouted transaction, every failed calculation had become a lesson in hubris, and I had orchestrated it perfectly. And the ultimate irony was that he had thought firing me would save money, streamline operations, and assert control, when in reality, it had done the exact opposite. And I had done it without confrontation, without malice, simply by letting the systems I had built, the employees I had trained, and the processes I had perfected function exactly as they were designed. And it was flawless, elegant, and utterly satisfying. And as I looked out the window at the skyline, sipping my coffee, I knew that this was the moment when Darren Cole, CEO, had finally realized that experience cannot be replaced, knowledge cannot be ignored, and arrogance is often the fastest path to financial disaster. And that for me, Cassidy Monroe, the legacy expert, this was not just a story of revenge, it was a story of quiet, strategic triumph, of letting karma unfold in the most American, corporate, Reddit-worthy way imaginable. And I couldn't stop smiling at the perfection of it all, knowing that the next time someone thought to underestimate me, they would remember Darren, the $55,000 lesson, and the woman who walked away laughing while he tried to fix a mess he had created with one impulsive, catastrophic decision.